take a moment to quickly point out the importance of careful planning. And obviously with pine, and especially construction grade, you're going to have knots throughout the board. Then when it comes time to cutting it, if you're fortunate enough, like I was in this case, you can try to get your cut set up to where the knots are in the scrap. Okay, so we got the bulk of the wood broken down. The rest of the pieces we're going to cut out as needed. Since this makes up the top and this makes up the legs, since they're going to be each one of these glued together, and then we'll cut out the shape after that. And then with these, I still need to trim to final size, so we got to get rid of the round over, and we'll go from there. Okay, of course the toughest part now is going to be laying out our pieces for the top in the orientation we want them to be. Now this wood's going to dictate that to a certain degree for the fact that some sides look nicer than others. This piece is going to be a middle. It still has a knot. I think the only knot that we will have on this top. Some of these boards still aren't terribly nice, maybe on an edge. Now I'm also going to put a chamfer, so that's another area that I went ahead and planned for, that if there's still a little mark, well, that's going to get cut off when I run the router over it. So that guarantees that has to be an outside and this has to be an outside. And our orientation in the middle is all we have to worry about. And I think I'll have it if we go like this. This looks pretty good. Yeah. Nothing a lot of sanding won't fix, right? And that's all she wrote. I was going to go right to the tabletop next, and after I cut it to size, this wood just felt to me a little bit still too damp, and especially on the fresh cut areas where I'm going to be applying glue, you want that to be as dry as possible. Even though I'm going to be using pocket screws, I think I'll let that sit one more day so that the fresh cuts can hopefully dry out a little bit better. So we'll move on to our blanks. And all we need to do for this is I've already taken the time to determine where my front face would be versus what the back of the leg's going to be. Putting the best side facing outward. Okay, it's a new day. I didn't realize that the camera shut off. In a lot of ways, I'm kind of glad it did, because I ended up having a major issue and I had to bleep out half of what I was saying anyways. What ended up happening is I was getting quite a bit of a bow. In one case, you could blame the clamps because I don't have enough of them and I was only clamping on one side and that caused it to bow. So my solution was to flip the board over, reapply the clamps, and add a gentle persuader to make sure it stayed flat with all of this clamping. And it appears to have worked. So now we can move on to the next part of this project. Okay, so we're finally at a point where we're going to make some progress. I've been having issue after issue, and I think I got the top worked out. I fixed the problems that I had. I ended up having to use pocket screws to put it back together. And I've got my blanks are glued up. Now they need to be cleaned up. I need to clean up all the edges. And basically we'll put this into a perfect rectangle. And then from there we can choose which side we want to cut out a notch. And I figured that the safest way to do that would be we set it just like it is here on the crosscut sled and then run the saw blade through and make our notch. And then from there we'll cut out the curved shape. We can then start putting everything together. And then it'll go pretty fast. But up to this point it's been nothing but one issue after an issue. And this top has been the biggest problem, and even still it's not perfect. So I may have to get creative with the belt sander or even get out my hand plane and see if I can get this a little bit more level without destroying it. Okay, so we're in the home stretch on this build. Now one thing I was being very careful of, as I may have mentioned before, is this whole project, it's a very forgiving project. You can adjust measurements on the fly. However, there are a few critical areas, and the biggest one is the top. Pretty much everything in the project, with the exception of these legs, is dependent upon the width and length of the top. Everything else gets adjusted accordingly to fit the top. Now the legs, the only thing that actually gets changed is possibly the height, but in these blanks you didn't have much room to spare anyways, or we would have needed more wood. So these were pretty much set. So now what we're going to do is we're going to sand as close as we want to the line. You can go all the way to the line, but as long as you sand, we just want to smooth out our cut from the bandsaw. As long as we're even close to the line, that's good enough, as long as we maintain the shape. So this is very forgiving, the legs. And then from that point, we're going to need to make our tenon that's going to go through here. And once we've got that sized, then we can final assembly the legs, put their tops and their bottoms on, and then we can deal with finalizing. The tenon itself will have a slot for the wedge to go through. And then from that, it's literally attach it to the top. But at the very end, we'll be focusing on the top as far as cleaning it up. I may need to do a little bit of trimming, but like I said, everything is pretty forgiving, so we shouldn't have any issues. So let's get these cleaned up and get assembling. So I apologize, there's a lot of missed clips. Well, I was going through the process and I had some unforeseen problems occur. This whole little chunk broke right off. So I had to deal with that, and I didn't have time to use straight wood glue, so I used my rapid fuse, and for some unknown reason it didn't want to work the first application. So I reapplied it, taped it up, and it seemed to work. I've even sanded the area and all as well. So all I have to do is get this plate onto this leg, and this section is done. And we did the cross brace. I don't believe I showed much of this, where I added this slight curve to it. I did the mortises, got those all shaped really nice. All we have to worry about is that table, so I plan on devoting the rest of the day to that. Hopefully this evening then we'll be putting finish on this. Okay, staining of the project is officially done. I had put 2 coats on the top. I hadn't done 2 on the legs. Well, I decided to do a second coat on the legs, and then there was a spot that I didn't like on the top, and I attempted to fix it. It took a little bit longer than I would have liked. So what I'm going to do now, instead of mounting the top to the legs, is I'm going to go ahead and clear everything, and then from there we'll mount the top. So I've got the varnish completely applied to the entire table. The way this project was laid out for us to follow for this challenge is you would simply just be pocket hole screws top to the bottom. I like to try to go without fasteners as much as possible. Well, I ran into problems with the top, and on one of these boards I did end up using pocket holes to get it to stay together. I wish I would have done pocket hole screws to the whole thing, then there wouldn't be such an issue. And the issue I'm talking about is expansion and contraction of wood. Now here in California that's not so much of an issue, but I think it's good practice to build with that in mind. So I wanted to figure out a way that I could make sure this is extremely firmly attached, but yet would allow some kind of movement. So what I'm going to do it's similar to, I think they call that fitting a figure eight. You'll hear the term. And what that is it's like a piece of metal, looks like a figure eight. You're like screwing down here and then screwing up. So you get really good mounting point. Now with this one, what I like is that, see, these holes are elongated. So this bracket, I'll router a little groove in the top of the leg here so they can sit flush to the underside of the top. I'm also going to have to router a little slot up here so that the heads of the bolts that go here will not interfere. What this is going to allow me to do is I'll be able to tighten down the top, but I'm only going to go just tight enough that this can't rattle. Crank it all the way down so that I know the top's on secure, but yet it should be able to slightly move if it expands and contracts.